The God Emperor of Mankind from Warhammer 40,000 is probably the most overpowered character in all of fiction.
Oh my god, he's so goddamn cool!
He can see the future, live forever, keep people from dying. He has obliterated thousands of demons with just his aura multiple times in the lore. He killed a dragon star god before he even started the Great Crusade, and then kept a part of its body inside of Mars, which turned out to be a 6D chess move in order to advance the humans that were living on Mars so that they could better create advanced technology for all of his armies in the future. And so, in this video, we will begin to explore this character in a bit of detail, taking our first steps in uncovering the layers and complexity of him, he who protects us all, the glorious God Emperor of Mankind. Welcome back to the 101 series, where we are taking our first steps into the complex lore of Warhammer 40,000. I hope you guys have been enjoying these videos as much as I have enjoyed making them. This is the first video where we will dive into the Emperor of Mankind, and I'm extra excited about this one. The Emperor was an aspect of the Warhammer lore that really got me down the rabbit hole. I watched all of Luton's many videos on the Emperor, and I've watched countless other YouTubers do video documentaries or video essays all about this character. I remember this time several years ago when I was first getting into Warhammer. I was traveling a lot, and listening to those videos ended up becoming routine. It was the first thing about the Warhammer lore that really got its teeth into me. Basically, it hooked me forever, and it also pushed me away from the Necrons, who were very nearly my first army. But after I learned about the Big E, I had to build armies of the Imperium only, starting with Custodes and expanding to my Dark Angels army. I say all that to say I'm pumped for you. If you're starting your deep dive into Warhammer and you've somehow stumbled onto this video, I am pumped for you. I have been here before, and this character is freaking fascinating. And for whatever reason, many folks seem to enjoy the way that I break down Warhammer lore, and that's awesome. I truly could not be happier about how all of this is coming together. I'm gonna continue to try to do this in a unique way, bringing value to both newcomers into the Warhammer lore, but also long-time lore hounds as well. Anyway, sorry for like the second intro here, but this video in particular holds a very special place in my heart. Seriously, thank you for watching this. Okay, so the Emperor of Mankind, or Anathema, as the Chaos Gods refer to him. Who is this guy exactly? Well, from what we know of the lore, he was born into ancient Turkey around the year 8000 BC. That's about 10,000 years in the past from our current year at the time of recording this video. He was born with incredible psychic abilities and also could not die, as he would resurrect every time that he did. Some people suggest that he was the very first psyker ever, but there's also a lot of older lore that implies many different shaman at the time combined their souls in a ritual in order to create the Emperor. Now, that whole shaman story has been soft retconned, but technically could still be true, as no new piece of lore has directly contradicted it. But hold on, you're probably thinking, what the fuck does that even mean? How can we not be sure about his origin? Well, I suppose it's as good a time as any to get into the weeds about how we learn about the Emperor. You see, there's a chapter in Master of Mankind, the 41st book in the Horus heresy, where a scene plays out that is a memory of the Emperor as a boy. This is where we learn that he was born in ancient Turkey, and it is a scene where we watch the Emperor kill his uncle. The young boy that would be Emperor touches the wound at the back of his dead father's skull and has a vision from his psychic powers. He sees that his uncle had killed his father. Then he walks outside to see his uncle acting like nothing was wrong, clearly hiding that he had killed his own brother. The boy holds up his father's skull, and his uncle looks at it, and his heart explodes from a psyker attack from the future Master of Mankind. But this is a vision the Emperor is showing to a Custodes in this book, and we have no way of knowing if this is his true actual origin. In fact, the Custodes that is being shown this vision, Ra, actually asks at the end of seeing this if this even is his master's true origin, which is such a nice little detail to this scene. Now look, this is just a 101 video, so we're going to try to not get caught up in the weeds here and instead just tell you what is out there in the lore about the Emperor. But a lot of the lore around the Emperor is like this. It is told through imperial records, it is told by the Emperor to someone else, and we're just not sure if he is actually telling the truth. Technically, the shaman theory could still be what it is. Technically, the Master of Mankind could be a relic of Dark Age technology like sentient AI that just got to god level power. There's a lot we don't know, but let's get back to the 101. This was the first time the Emperor killed, and it was his own uncle who had slain his own father. So basically, all of the fucking drama with the primarchs' sons in the future, that all actually ends up making a lot more sense when you consider this very early trauma. This was also when the Emperor decided that mankind needed moral guidance and protection from the corruption that was always trying to take our hearts. After this, he decided he would forever try to shepherd and guide humanity. From there, the Emperor lives many different lives, trying to help humanity in different ways. It is heavily implied that he was Buddha, attempting to spread a message of inner peace and discipline, likely in an attempt to give humanity tools to fight against the corruption of the chaos gods. It is explained in some of the newer lore that the Emperor lived as Alexander the Great, and that this was the first time he had realized that there were actually millions of worlds to conquer, and it gave him a shock that he had to overcome. It's heavily implied that the Emperor lived many, many different lives, standing behind great leaders as aides or mentors. He was likely Merlin and other advisors to kings. He was probably at Atlantis, possibly even one of its founders. For thousands of years, the Emperor guided and aided humanity as it grew and matured. Eventually, humanity learns of the warp as a way to create interstellar travel. On top of that, our technological prowess reached an absolutely crazy level. We can't fully comprehend the levels of technology that humanity had during this time period, mostly because the majority of it gets wiped out in the conflicts during the Long Night. What we do know is that this technology was so advanced that even small pieces of it that are found in the modern 40K setting are considered the most powerful artifacts that any human can have access to. Some of it can slow and stop time. Some of it could destroy all life on a planet. Some of it could actually create self-replicating AI. The two most known pieces of tech from this time were the Men of Iron, or the Iron Men. These were giant metal sentinel AI robots that helped us cast aside all hostile forces in the galaxy with ease. The other key piece of Dark Age technology were called STCs. STC stands for the Standard Template Construct. These were collective AI networks and robotics units, and they were the apex of humanity's technological prowess. STCs are going to be their whole own video. Like, they are a fascinating part of the Warhammer lore that we're going to deep dive on eventually. But for now, you just need to know that STCs are so powerful that a single one of them could help any human colony create any type of technology that would be needed for any particular planet to be terraformed and become a thriving human civilization. It's also worth pointing out that these machines can explain to even the most dumb humans what these humans would need to do in order to push things forward. They were foolproof AI, super intelligent robotics technologies that could help humans do whatever they needed to take over different planets. Now, the reason this all has to do with the Emperor is because it's important to discuss that humanity thrived to this place as the Emperor guided them. We know this because there are scenes in the modern Warhammer time period where some modern Imperial humans meet an STC. And that STC basically says it's super sad because it expected to meet humans like the ones it knew from the Golden Age that were awesome and enlightened, and instead it now sees how barbaric and savage humanity and the Imperium has become. So basically, at one time, humanity was dope and brilliant, and they spread across the scars. However, it didn't last, and those those men of iron, those big sentient robot guardians I talked about, yeah, they turned on humanity and started a rebellion. Also around this time, humanity had a massive psychic awakening and warp storms popped up all around the galaxy, making interstellar travel incredibly difficult. So humanity could no longer just travel from world to world. This had to do with the fall of the Eldar Empire and the creation of a new chaos god, Slaanesh. Now, the way the Imperial history books tell it, this is the moment where the Emperor of Mankind decided to reveal himself to humanity and save us all. Somehow, in his infinite wisdom, he knew this was the moment to reforge humanity into a unified empire of war. This implies that his grand plan had been conceived long ago. And there's evidence to support this. If you consider that there were two main things done right before the Great Crusade, and one of them happened like a long time ago, yeah, the Emperor was probably planning this shit for a while. What I'm referring to is the Emperor fighting a star god that was a dragon known as the Void Dragon. This was one of the Catan, one of the space gods the Necrons had given metal bodies to, and then those bodied god metal things turned around and screwed over the Necrons and took their souls. So we're talking about entities that are about as powerful as you can get within the Warhammer lore. And the Emperor slays this dragon, shattering it, which on a side note I've always loved because it reminds me of the Enuma Elish from Babylonian myth, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole, and someday I do want to speak more about the myth and a lot of ancient stories that to me, I just keep seeing pop up in all the Warhammer lore. But back to the dragon and the Emperor, he places a shard of this void dragon deep within Mars. And this was a part of his big plan in order to give the human beings that were living on Mars an affinity for machines. Their culture would revolve around a spiritual relationship with technology and machine, which the Emperor would later exploit by having them be the beating heart of the weapons manufacturing of his war machine. And there's something else really interesting about this bit of lore, and that's that it's not in the Imperial records. Instead, we know about this event because of the Eldar's Black Library, a place where they just house all the information and history of the galaxies, and the Necron codexes, who of course have a much longer view of the history of the entire universe. This implies that the God Emperor of Mankind destroying the Void Dragon was an event of galactic scale that all of these main players witnessed in some way. It was a big enough deal that they kept a record of it, and yet the Emperor keeps this truth from the Imperium. Is this because he believes if the Mechanicum knew about this, they would turn on him? Just one of the many questions about what the Emperor was actually thinking as he was taking these actions. Another thing we could take away from this event is that it likely happened a long time ago, like way before the Emperor actually reveals himself after the Long Night. This could have been done during the Age of Strife, where all of this conflict was going on. Maybe the Emperor just slays the dragon around that time. But there were human settlements on Mars already at that time, so it's far more likely that the Emperor slayed this dragon thousands of years before humanity even got to Mars. And so again, this makes us think the Emperor's plan for the Great Crusade goes back much further than the collapse of our galactic expansion. So in a sense, yes, the Emperor did see this as the perfect opportunity to swoop in, become the hero of humanity, and unite it. But there's another thing the Emperor does before revealing himself to all of us. This would be him meeting with and striking a deal with the Chaos Gods. This happens on a planet called Moloch, where a very special portal exists. We don't know exactly what this portal is, but it's a place where the Emperor and then Horus actually go into and are able to meet and have conversation with the Chaos God. Interestingly, the Emperor travels to Moloch without using warp travel. And in the lore, it is said that he did this as to not warn the Chaos Gods of his coming arrival. So the Emperor and a few perpetuals travel at normal speed going to this planet, sort of stealthed to the warp. The Emperor then arrives and enters this portal, and whatever it is, it does does allow him to speak with the Chaos Gods and literally make a deal with them. Some say it gave the Emperor greater power, and that makes sense because it certainly did that to Horus, but it's also possible this meeting merely gave the Emperor knowledge, as he was frankly already about as powerful as he probably could ever be. And in fact, there's a relatively new part of the lore, or at least this part of the lore has been more refined in the last few years. And this aspect of the lore refers to the Emperor becoming a chaos god himself. There's this figure known as the Dark King that's sort of teased all throughout the Horus Heresy novels, but again, really heavily explained in the last few years of those books. And it seems to imply that the Emperor himself could have become a chaos god, and if he would have been known as the Dark King, and then he would have actually ruled over all of the other chaos gods. This is described as somewhat of a worst case scenario, and some even believe that this is the reason the chaos gods would even meet with the Emperor in the first place, because they saw a potential future where he was their future king. However, this meeting must have gone pretty poorly because the Emperor leaves the portal, rushes back to Terra, and starts his crusade. The Chaos Gods basically quickly realize that the Emperor is going to fuck them over, and so they scatter his primarch demigod sons across the galaxy by corrupting their mom, Erda. This was a big setback, but the Emperor just kind of kept his head down and started building up his armies. He goes on to create the Custodes, starting with the most giga-chad warrior in the whole setting, Constantine Valdor. He then creates the Thunder Warriors by converting the most insane, violent barbarians of Terra into makeshift super soldiers. Finally, he then creates the Space Marines, using the DNA of his scattered Primarch sons to create a version of the super soldiers that was kind of like between the Thunder Warriors and the fucking Custodes. They're real cool. They're the Space Marines, and you've seen that. You know them. The Thunder Warriors were ridiculous, but they did help the Emperor retake Terra. Then the Custodes and the Space Marines helped the Emperor take out the Thunder Warrior because they were too crazy. They just had to go. From there, the Emperor takes over the moon and then strikes a pact with Mars by pretending to be their machine god. And remember, the Emperor kind of sets this up by putting that void dragon there. The Martian tech priests of Mars then help the Emperor create all kinds of awesome weapons and armor for his Space Marines and Custodes. And around that time, the Emperor finds his first son, Horus. We have to imagine this was a super big deal for the Emperor. He makes the deal with the Chaos Gods. He creates these demigod sons. They get scattered, and he's like, okay, we just gotta roll with this. He starts taking over Earth, creating more super soldiers, and essentially preparing legions of soldiers for when he eventually does find these Primarchs, because he's still going to put them in charge of the legions of Space Marines, and he still wants them to perform the frontline fighting for this great crusade, which is going to unite all of humanity. And so he finds his first son, Horus. Horus was found on a planet called Chthoniya, and this world is described as very close to Terra. It's possible it's actually in the same solar system as Terra, or more likely a close solar system. Chthoniya was a harsh, overmined world full of gangsters, which would have an impact on Horus's morality even after he spent a huge amount of time with his father. The Emperor runs a campaign, takes control of Chthoniya, and brings it into the Imperium, recruiting from its brutal gangsters for Horus's son, Space Marine. Horus realizes that this is his father, and he decides to join him. From there, with the Emperor and the Custodes, Horus wages war across the galaxy, and together they bring at least 30 major human worlds into the Imperium. Horus spends the most time out of any of the other Primarchs with his father, but then they found Fenris and Leman Russ, and everything changed. The Emperor goes alone to confront Russ, who was already the ruler of his home planet. Russ had earned the respect of his people and was worshipped as the Wolf King demigod of that world. The Emperor presents himself as a stranger to Russ, looking for the Wolf King to challenge his strength. The Primarch then challenges the Emperor to a drinking competition, an eating competition, and then finally a fight in hand-to-hand combat. The Emperor ends up knocking Russ out, but he reveals himself as Russ's father upon the Primarch awakening. The two embrace as Russ instantly understands that this is his father, and he swears fealty to him. But importantly, this was also when Horus first started becoming a jealous bitch. He did not like Lehman, and this fraternal bitterness would eventually boil over into full-blown rebellion and attempted patricide. There's a lot to get into around this time in the lore. I mean, the Crusade includes the Emperor meeting all the different Primarch sons, bringing them into the Imperium, and then there are many different battles and conflicts that occur. There's a lot of detail to drill down on, but also a lot of esoteric ideas to consider. I've always found it so interesting how the Emperor was aware that there would likely be a civil war, and therefore was, in a sense, setting up his sons like chess pieces on a board. There's even a short story in one of the Horus Heresy novels where Malcador and the Emperor play out a sort of game on a tabletop, and over the course of the story it becomes clear that they are talking about the actual rebellion that is upcoming, and they are trying to decide which Primarchs will turn traitor. It's also heavily teased in the lore that although Lionel Johnson was specifically the best general among his sons, the Emperor did not make the Lion the War Master, likely specifically because he didn't want to fight against the Lion in rebellion. The same might be said of Sanguinius as well. Like, the Emperor just knew he couldn't make Sanguinius War Master because that might make it so that Sanguinius was the son that falls to chaos and starts the rebellion. And it's implied that the Emperor was still uncertain if the Lion would become a traitor or not. But I think there's a part of him that truly feared what a Lionel Johnson-led rebellion would look like. A lot of this stuff is speculative. We don't know for sure, but that's a really fun element of the lore as well. And I'll go into detail about all this sort of stuff in future videos, but for the sake of this 101 video, all you really need to understand is that the Emperor was creating weapons and space marines like crazy. He was going around finding all of his Primarch demigod sons and then putting those Primarchs in charge of their respective legions of space marines. And for the most part, things go pretty well, or at least well enough for the Emperor to begin the next stage of his plan. And so Big E puts Horus in charge of all of the Imperial armies, and he returns to Terra with the Custodes to finish the Webway project. Now, the Webway project was a subway system of tunnels that allowed interstellar travel without entering the warp itself. It was originally started by the old ones and then later refined by the Eldar. And this was clearly a big part of the Emperor's plan, as he wanted to give humanity protection against the warp forever. The Emperor also discovered a piece of technology early on in his life known as the Golden Throne. The throne is a very mysterious part of Warhammer, and it's something the lore seems to keep adding to in more recent books. In the old lore, it was really thought of as more of a life support system that keeps the Emperor alive, but we now know that it's not that simple. In a sense, the Emperor himself is keeping the throne alive, and if he were to die or be removed from the throne, it would mean the failure of holding back all of the demons in the Webway. This device was somehow discovered on ancient Terra by the Emperor, or at least a part of it was, and then he built on top of it. We also know that it's made of at least partially Eldar technology, as in some recent books, some Custodes and even some Inquisitors strike a deal with some Dark Eldar in an attempt to gain the ability to fix the Golden Throne. So the Emperor likely became aware of this Golden Throne and of the Webway project way long ago, maybe even around the time that he fought the Void Dragon. And at the point in his Great Crusade, when all the Primarchs are there and they're out leading these armies, he retreats back to Terra to work on this Webway project. But it's here where we must remember that the Chaos Gods were trying to fuck with the Emperor to turn him into the Dark King like the whole time. And one of the things that was going on at the time was the Emperor's plan to deal with this whole thing. And part of that came in the form of the Imperial Truth, which was an ideology the Emperor forced upon the whole Imperium. This was a doctrine of rationalism, science, and atheism. It was designed to force religion and mysticism out of human culture. The Emperor forbid worship of gods, including the worship of himself as a god. In fact, he hid the truth about the Chaos Gods from almost everybody in the Imperium, including most of the primarchs' sons. And this truth would ultimately become the match that would light the fuse of Horus's betrayal. Horus would come to learn that there were, in fact, gods. He would discover that his own father was not only aware of these gods, but he actually had met with them and made a deal with them. On top of that, the Emperor had erased some of Horus's memory, including some memories of their time together on that planet Moloch with that portal. So Horus turns traitor and he goes to Moloch himself to have a conversation with the Chaos God. And they totally swindle him. They turn him to the dark side super fast. He becomes the Chaos God's new champion and he gets a ton of power from them. And at this moment in the lore, Magnus, one of the other primarchs that was like super gifted in psychic abilities, yeah, he tries to call the Emperor and be like, hey dad, Horus is fucking around. He's gonna do a rebellion. It's gonna be real bad. Except that by doing this, Magnus wrecks the Webway project, which again was like a big part of the Emperor's plan. He had been working on that for a long time to try to make it so humanities didn't have to use the warp travel anymore. And frankly, Magnus was warned not to do something like this, and he did it, and his father gives him just like a scold that psychically scars him for life, kind of like fucks him up. Like, you know that look that dads give their children when the children are being really bad? The Emperor basically does that to Magnus, but with a bunch of psychic power behind it, and Magnus kind of turns into a little bitch boy. But it kind of makes sense. It really screws everything up for the Emperor. And you've got to know that. You have to know that Magnus breaks the Webway project. The Emperor is then forced to get onto the Golden Throne because he has to use his psychic abilities to keep the Webway from collapsing and having a bunch of demons just enter into Terra. The Emperor sends in the full force of the Custodes, 10,000 of the strongest warriors in the whole Custodes. The Sisters of Silence go in there as well. And that army fights back infinite hordes of demons and Chaos Space Marines for 5 years straight. And so what was going really well ends up turning to total shit like really, really fast. So at this point, the Emperor is stuck on the Golden Throne. He's using all the power he possibly can to just keep the entire universe from collapsing in on itself and a bunch of demons coming in and fucking everybody's faces. On top of that, there's full-on rebellion out there. Horus now has the powers of the Chaos Gods. He's totally jacked up Super Saiyan 4. And he's turned a bunch of the other primarchs to traitor as well. They're all marching towards Terra. Oh, and all of his best soldiers are fighting a secret war in another dimension to hold back an infinite horde of demons. And so it's here we must pause to consider the Emperor as a man. How's he dealing with all of this? Like, he had a master plan. Is this a part of the plan, or is he just doing the best he can in this situation? Something interesting is that Magnus was very likely meant to actually sit on the Golden Throne instead of the Emperor. And the Emperor, again, he totally warned Magnus about doing too much space magic shit. But I don't think the Emperor saw that Magnus would destroy the Webway, but it also seems like the Emperor was kind of prepared for the Webway to be destroyed. After all, the Emperor does remove all of his Custodes from the front lines of the Great Crusade and station them on Terra, so they were ready to go into the Webway. On top of that, the construction of the Golden Throne was done over thousands of years, and it was built in a way to ensure that the Emperor and some other people could sit upon it and hold the Webway together. Big E also designed the additions to the Golden Throne to allow the sacrifice of Psykers to power it temporarily in order to let him or someone else get off of it. So all of these factors together kind of indicate that the Emperor was trying to finish the Webway and yet also preparing for it to fail. This points to the Emperor seeing multiple versions of the future and planning for as many of these events as were possible. And so I just find this all really fascinating. Like, this all happens, it's going to shit, but the Emperor has resources in order to combat against some of it, because there's always this question: how much of this was a part of the plan, and how much of the plans around this seeming big failure and this big rebellion, how much of those plans around it were what was actually supposed to happen? Either way, that all takes us to the most famous part of the Emperor's story. This is where Horus makes a desperate play because he realizes that the loyal primarchs are indeed going to be able to hold the siege back long enough for the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels to arrive. And Horus knows even with all of the chaos power, he will not be able to stand up against all of the loyal primarchs united defending Terra. And so he puts the shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, down, basically inviting his father to come face him. And the Emperor decides to go for it, wanting to end all of this once and for all. Malcador the Sigillite, who, by the way, I've been talking about a fair bit in this video, and maybe some of you have no idea who he is. So quick TLDR on that, he is the Emperor's best friend. He's a Merlin-like figure to the Emperor, and he is also a perpetual himself and a very powerful psyker. And now that you know all of that, you're gonna find out that he agrees to get onto the Golden Throne to allow the Emperor to go bitch slap Horus, but this destroys Malcador. This is how he dies. The power of the throne is too much for basically anybody other than the Emperor, and the thing tears Malcador into atoms. Pour one out for Malcador because he's a true homie, and we will do multiple videos on him in the future. So the Emperor goes to Horus's flagship, and they have a crazy, and I mean straight jacket bonkers, crazy fight that spans space and time and other realities. The basics of it are that the Emperor does kill Horus, but is mortally wounded himself. And this is when the Emperor is then put onto the Golden Throne, where he remains in an agonizing cycle of death and rebirth for the next 10,000 years. But it is here where I want to stop this video, but it's because there's going to be a whole nother part 2 to this. I want to discuss in a bit more detail what happened in this fight with Horus and what has happened to the Emperor in the next 10,000 years, and then maybe most importantly and most interestingly, what is going on with the Emperor right now in the lore. Because the current lore around the Emperor is actually really fascinating, even when we just cover it in the broad strokes, which is what we like to do here with these 101 videos. So there you have it, the Emperor of Mankind from Warhammer 40,000 explained in a 101 way, and this of course is just part 1 to a 2-part series. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.